Okay, so here are our nouns. So we're now going to add some adjectives to them. And I'm going to start by describing the hills. Now, as you can see, the hills are not at the front of the picture. They're in the background, aren't they? They're in the distance. So therefore, I'm going to describe them as the distant hills. Now, what other words could I use? What other adjectives could I use to describe the hills? Well, can you see they look like they're going on for quite a while? So therefore, I'm going to use the adjective rolling, the rolling hills. Okay, so I've got two adjectives to describe the hills, the distant hills and the rolling hills. Okay, now I'm going to pick the sun. What adjectives could I use to describe the sun? Well, we know that the sun is very hot, don't we? So therefore, I'm going to describe it as blazing, the blazing sun, using the adjective blazing. Now, what else could I use to describe the sun? Well, I'm also going to describe it as golden. And as well, it looks like it's rising, doesn't it? So therefore, we're going to describe it as rising. So I've got the blazing sun, the golden sun, and the rising sun. Now I'm going to choose, which noun shall I choose next? I'm going to choose the plants. Now, how could I describe the plants? Well, the plants are right in the middle of the desert, aren't they? So therefore, they are wild plants, and I'm going to use the adjective wild to describe them. Now, what else could I use? What are the adjectives? Well, they're growing in the middle of the desert and it's very, very hot, okay? So therefore, they're probably struggling quite a bit to survive and they're probably not as healthy as they could be. So therefore, I'm going to describe them as withered, okay? So they're not that healthy and they might be going a little bit discoloured, okay, because of the temperature. So I'm going to describe the plants as wild and as withered. Now, what I would like you to do is pause the video and have a think. How could we describe the desert floor and how could we describe the animals? Which adjectives could we use? And you might have some ideas from when we did the Lion King description because we described the desert floor then, didn't we? Okay, so pause the video now. How many adjectives can you think of to describe the desert floor and the animals? Okay, so were you able to come up with some adjectives? Fantastic, well done. So let's have a look first at the desert floor. Now, how could we describe the desert floor? Well, I thought we could describe it as sandy, the sandy desert floor. Okay, I also thought, because it's so hot, it's probably going to be quite dry, isn't it? So therefore, the dry desert floor. And finally, because it's dry, it's probably started to crack a little bit, hasn't it? So therefore, the cracked desert floor. Okay, so those are the three adjectives I thought of for the desert floor. Now, what about the animals? Well, the animals are just like the plants. They're wild, aren't they? So we can describe the animals as wild using the adjective wild. Now, what else? What other adjectives could we use to describe the animals? Well, what are the animals doing? They're eating, aren't they? Now, another word for eating is grazing, okay? If you're picking at some food. So the animals look like they're picking at the plants. So therefore, I'm going to describe them as grazing animals, okay? So I've got wild animals and grazing animals. I wonder if you came up with any adjectives that were similar or whether you had completely different ones. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now, your picture of the waterhole. I would like you, just like I've done here, to add some adjectives to your nouns. So pause the video now and have a go. Okay, year two. So now that we've got our nouns and our adjectives, we are going to create some expanded noun phrases. Now remember, an expanded noun phrase needs a determiner like lots of, or a or an, or the, or a number, or most, or many. Okay, so a determiner at the beginning. Then we need our two adjectives. And what do we need between our two adjectives? Well, we need a comma to separate them. And that's one of the places where we've seen a comma before when we were looking at punctuation yesterday. So you will have recognised that. And then finally, we need our noun. So determiner, two adjectives with a comma in between them, and then our noun at the end. And I've added our the last page to the top of this page so we can use the nouns and the adjectives that we've just looked at rather than having to flick back and forth. Okay, so let's start by creating an expanded noun phrase for the sun. Okay, now I have got for the sun the adjectives blazing, golden, and rising. Now, I only need 2 of these adjectives for my expanded noun phrase. So I'm going to write the golden rising sun. So I've got my determiner there, which is the. I've then picked the 2 adjectives, golden and rising, and I've made sure that I've got my comma in between the 2 adjectives. So I've got golden, comma, rising, and then finally I have got sun at the end. Okay, so now I am going to create an expanded noun phrase for the animals. Now for the animals, I only had 2 adjectives anyway, so those are going to be the 2 adjectives that I'm going to use. So I'm going to say some wild, comma, grazing. So I've got my determiner at the beginning, some. I've got my 2 adjectives, wild and grazing, with a comma in the middle of them. And then I've got my noun, animals. Some wild, comma, grazing, animals. Okay, so there's 2 expanded noun phrases already. Now, what I would like you to do is pause the video, and I would like you to create an expanded noun phrase to describe the desert floor, okay? Use some of the adjectives that I've got, or if you thought of some other adjectives when we did this earlier, you can use those as well. Okay, so pause the video now and have a go. Okay, year 2. So have you created your expanded noun phrase? Fantastic. Well, I created one too, and I have gone for the dry, sandy desert floor. Okay, so I've got the dry, comma, sandy desert floor. So the is my determiner. Then I've got my 2 adjectives, dry and sandy, with a comma in between them, and then my noun, desert floor. Okay, so I wonder if you had something similar to me, or if you'd use some different adjectives, or even a different determiner. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now, you've probably guessed, is I'd like you to go back to your picture of the waterhole, and I would like you to create at least 5 expanded noun phrases using your nouns and your adjectives. Okay, so that is the end of our English lesson for today. So if you could go and have a go at creating your expanded noun phrases, that would be fantastic. And I can't wait to see them when you send them to the office. Have a lovely rest of your day, year 2, and I'll see you in our next lesson. Bye.